ครับคุณซิฟครับ so first of all like I would like to hear more from your perspective as an economist. I would like to hear whether the capitalism in our modern economy is it functioning or not, like from your view.
Capitalism's greatest claim to fame, compared to any other social system, is the extent to which it's harnessed our capacity for innovation. And that has always been the best thing about capitalism. At the same time, the capitalist system needs a monetary system to function effectively. And we occasionally let the monetary system get out of control and create too much debt, which finances speculative bubbles. And we're at a point in time where that has happened, possibly to a scale which has never been experienced before in human history. So capitalism as an innovation system is now being constrained by the financial system, which has created too much debt for that productive system to carry. So I see capitalism as suffering by enabling an essential part of it to get out of control, which is the monetary system.
Okay, so like I've talked to Mr. Richard like already, and he proposed some kind of view that the ongoing capitalism is oriented toward creditism, right? Do you agree or disagree with his view?
Richard is quite accurate on that front. There's only a handful of economists who really concern themselves about the role of banks in creating debt, which creates money, which is an essential part of capitalism turning over, but creating debt at a much, much faster rate than the economy itself is growing. And that then gives you a debt burden, which means ultimately that people stop borrowing because they don't want to mortgage their future effectively, and therefore the economy slows down and goes into a slump. And that is what has happened in the West. That's what caused the crisis back in 2007, 2008. And it means that because the debt has accumulated, so much debt has been accumulated, people no longer wish to borrow to invest. And therefore your rate of investment slows down and the economy goes into a slump, which is, as in the case of Japan, we can see could last up to a quarter of a century. Now that really means the only way out of this is to eliminate a large amount of that private debt. But that involves reversing political power, because at the moment the banks and the creditors have enormous political influence, given how large the banking sector has grown to be. It's the debtors who have low political influence, but until we favour the debtors over the creditors, we're going to be caught in a long-run slump caused by the financial sector.
So like in terms of the US government, we can see that like the debt proportion as accumulated by the government itself as well as the private sector has been growing dramatically. So is it facing the same situation as you mentioned earlier, the criticism, and what could be the key consequences?
Well, people always focus on the level of government debt, and that's because conventional economic theory says you can ignore private debt. If you look at what Paul Krugman argues regularly, he says banks don't matter, private debt only matters when you get to the situation America is now in, where the interest rate is zero, and therefore you can't stimulate people who were savers to spend more money. And Richard also comes from the school that says debt matters at all times, and therefore the level of private debt is an essential issue. Now, people are worrying about the level of government debt rising from 60% of GDP in America to approaching 100%. And that's what they think is the problem. In fact, the problem was that private debt reached 180% of GDP and has now fallen about 10 to 15%. And that decline in debt finance spending is what caused the economic crisis. So the government's increase in debt was a response to the crisis. It didn't cause the problem. And it's a bit like people saying, you need to worry about the Band-Aid on a wound. The Band-Aid is the problem, let's rip the Band-Aid off. And we're saying, no, the problem is the wound caused by too much private debt. And the government's reaction actually has made the crisis less extreme than it would have been if the government hadn't gone into that debt. But ultimately the problem is to reduce the private debt without reducing private demand at the same time. And that can only be done if you write the debt off, but the government then, through the Federal Reserve, creates spending power that is cancelled by debt being reduced. And that is a political shift in America that I do not expect to see because it is just too big a shift. So I think we're going to find ourselves in the same situation Japan has been in for a quarter of a century now, of slowly reducing the level of private debt while the government debt slowly rises, and the two cancel each other out, and you therefore have an economy which is neither stimulated nor dragged down.